So good afternoon. I'm joined by Transportation Secretary Stephanie Pollack and MEMA Director Kurt Schwartz and General Gary Keefe from the National Guard. As many of you know, a major coastal storm is forecast to impact the Commonwealth beginning tonight and lasting through Sunday. The forecast calls for major flooding up and down the entire Massachusetts coastline all day tomorrow and into Saturday. To put this in perspective, the coastal flooding warnings for this storm are forecasted to be more severe than the storm that hit the Commonwealth on January 4th, meaning we're expecting to see flooding to the same level or higher in prone areas along a majority of our coastline. We also expect to see hurricane-force winds along the coast and potential for rain to turn into significant snowfall in Berkshire and Worcester counties. The storm will overlap with 3 high tide cycles, midday Friday, Friday night, and Saturday midday. That's why the National Weather Service anticipates storm surges between 3 and 4 feet during these high tide cycles along the coast from Salisbury and Newburyport all the way down to the Upper Cape. The combination of storm surge and astronomically high tides means that a significant amount of that water will not recede between the high tide times of 11:30 a.m. and p.m. on Friday. All shorelines, including the islands, are at risk for moderate to major coastal flooding and severe erosion at some point during this storm. Heavy rain will also cause street flooding in urban and poor drainage areas and significant rises in rivers and streams. The strong wind gusts associated with this storm may cause tree damage and scattered power outages, especially in eastern Massachusetts. Again, we're expecting to see more severe flooding issues here than we saw in the January 4th storm. That means some roads in downtown Boston and roads along the coast that usually have flooding issues will likely become impassable for some time. For example, certain sections of the Seaport District and the North End and Morrissey Boulevard will likely flood for some period of time on Friday. We could also see flooding in other low-lying areas that typically don't have issues in less severe storms. There's also real potential for significant structural damage along the coast. It's possible we'll see homes severely damaged or in some cases maybe even destroyed. The storm will affect the entire state. In Berkshire County, heavy wet snow combined with strong winds may result in downed power lines and scattered outages, and we're closely monitoring those forecasts as this comes to fruition. I just signed an order to activate the National Guard, where we expect up to 200 National Guardsmen and women to be working with our state and local officials over the coming days. General Keefe can share any additional information on that in a minute. MEMA has been working with the National Weather Service to track the storm throughout the week, and this morning at 9 a.m. convened a meeting to discuss statewide support capabilities with several key stakeholders. To name just a few, Mass DOT, the State Police, the Office of Coastal Zone Management, the Department of Fire Services, the National Guard, the U.S. Coast Guard, and the American Red Cross. And as of right now, the Lieutenant Governor and other members of our administration is leading a call with several local city and town officials, mostly along the coastline, to ensure they have the appropriate resources to deal with the coastal flooding. A top priority for MEMA and the National Guard will be working with our coastal communities to deploy high water rescue vehicles to any coastal community that's requested one. The National Guard is also proactively staging teams and vehicles across different coastal locations so that they will be able and positioned to play should they be needed. We are also working with the State Police, the Environmental Police, and the Department of Fire Services to activate swift water rescue teams in case they're needed. The MBTA, the commuter rail, and Massport are deploying resources to prepare for flooding in known flood zones of their own. And as we saw in the January 4th storm, some MBTA assets may be impacted by serious flooding. I can't stress this enough. This isn't a snowstorm in eastern Mass, but the storm itself, especially along the coast, is shaping up to be more severe than the storm on January 4th. While crews were able to perform rescues in between high tide cycles in January, it's possible that first responders will be unable to reach all flooded areas at peak high tide tomorrow. We've been in touch with dozens of communities up and down the coast, and many are considering evacuation orders. If you live in an area that's told to evacuate, we strongly encourage you to do that first thing Friday morning. Many folks may not be able to return until late Saturday or maybe even Sunday. And that means people should plan for medicine, clothing, food, money, and pets. Many communities are setting up local shelters, working with MEMA and others, while the Red Cross organizes regional facilities. If you are in one of these typically affected areas, do not ride out the storm in your home if you are told to evacuate. As I said earlier, rescue during the storm may not be possible. Staying in homes that are in flood-prone areas puts yourself and the first responders at risk. If you're on the roads, please allow plenty of room for stopping and do not drive through large puddles because sometimes it's difficult to know just how deep the water is. And be good neighbors, check in on those around you, especially those who live alone. Visit mass211.com and MEMA's homepage for more information. We are obviously no strangers to difficult and unexpected weather, and we fully expect the next 48 hours to be particularly challenging along the coast. So please prepare in advance and be as safe as possible.
So while we're not expecting snow in eastern Massachusetts, the Highway Department will be prepared for heavy wet snow in the Berkshires and the Worcester Hills and anywhere else it may fall. As the governor said, we expect flooding on roadways. If you live in a community where the roadways flood regularly, you know which ones we're talking about. You should probably plan a way to get home tomorrow that avoids those roads, as we do expect coastal road closures. And to reinforce what the governor said, if you come across an area of roadway that appears to be flooded, don't drive into it. It may be much deeper than you perceive. For the MBTA, the number one thing that we have decided in consultation with the Coast Guard is the ferry service will not run tomorrow. The Coast Guard believes that marine conditions are too dangerous for the ferries. So the ferries are not going to be operating. We will be telling our customers that on their commutes home this evening. We will also increase the amount of coaches available on the Greenbush commuter rail line so that our Hingham and Hull customers can choose to take commuter rail rather than the ferries tomorrow. In addition, the MBTA has been working since yesterday to prepare for areas where there have been flooding problems, including those where there were flooding problems during the January 4th storm. For example, right now sandbagging is taking place at Aquarium Station, which you may recall flooded and had to be closed. The biggest concern for the MBTA is the coastal commuter rail routes and tidal inundation, because when we have flooding due to tides as opposed to rain, it's salt water. Salt water is really hard on mechanical and electrical, so if we have long-term tidal inundation, which the forecasts are calling for, it may interrupt service and it may take us a while to get service back safely. So we encourage everyone who will be using the MBTA tomorrow, particularly for the commute home, to keep up to date via apps or the web or text alerts to make sure that you know how services are being affected by the storm if they are. Finally, Massport reminds folks that the projected high winds may affect the ability of the airport to safely land and take off airplanes. Anyone who has travel plans for tomorrow should be checking with their airlines. A number of airlines have already announced that they will waive change orders, so if you want to make changes in your travel plans today, you may already be able to.
Thank you. So as you've heard, we're anticipating a very severe multi-hazard weather event. Governor Baker spoke directly to the coastal flooding we're anticipating. I just want to underscore that this is we are anticipating many areas of major coastal flooding across our whole East Coast. Areas that receive major coastal flooding will be extremely dangerous for people to be in. People in homes in those areas where major coastal flooding is forecast need to evacuate pre-storm. As Governor Baker says, it will be dangerous to remain in the homes. Not only may rescue not be possible, but homes will be subject to significant structural damage. We expect to lose homes during the storm. If you are in one of those areas, you need to get out. Moving water, as you heard from General Keefe, presents a real hazard to vehicles. Do not attempt to drive through standing, moving water associated with this storm. The rainfall we're expecting, particularly in southeast Massachusetts, we may see areas up to 5 inches of rain during the day from tonight through tomorrow. So we may see areas of significant urban poor drainage flooding, particularly in southeast Massachusetts. The winds along the whole coastline, we may see gusts from 60 to 70 miles an hour, but over the Cape and Islands and perhaps southern Plymouth County, we may be looking at gusts from 70 to 80, even 90 miles per hour. That's hurricane force winds. These winds, particularly again, southeast Massachusetts, are dangerous. You should not be driving in winds like that. You should not be outside walking in winds like that. We expect those winds will cause not only power outages, but they may cause some structural damage to homes and other buildings. And then finally, we need to pay attention to snow. We do anticipate a transition to snow, as you heard in the Berkshire County, Worcester Hills. It is too early to know whether we'll see a transition to snow across more of the state. And in a reasonable worst-case scenario, we could see a significantly greater snowfall. So we need to watch that carefully. Heavy, wet snow combined with heavy winds lends itself to significant power outages. So again, a significant event, prolonged event, really winding up early tomorrow morning and with us with these significant impacts right through the day on Saturday. MEMA has been working under the direction of the governor's office with all of our partner state agencies, federal agencies, municipalities to ensure that we have the resources ready to go to support cities and towns tomorrow. You heard General Keefe talk about the deployment of high water vehicles. We're also supporting sandbagging operations, the staging of heavy equipment to help with debris clearance after the storm, impact assessments. And the State Emergency Operations Center will activate early tomorrow morning, and we expect to go 24/7 for at least the first 48 to 72 hours, again, for a prolonged event. But we are, I think, well positioned to work through this dangerous storm well, and if the public heeds the advice of local public officials and the governor to evacuate those areas that are going to flood and then stay indoors and avoid driving through high water, and particularly driving through these very high winds in the southeast, we'll get through this safely. Thank you.
Questions for any of these folks?
Well, Governor, it sounds like between the wonderful weather today and what you're expecting from the storm, you expect people are maybe going to underestimate this storm.
You know, I literally said to somebody earlier, if you look outside, it's hard to believe what this is going to look like and be like, especially along the coast, tomorrow and Saturday. And I can't stress enough. I mean, usually when we have these conversations with the National Weather Service, you know, they kind of start here with respect to the severity of the storm, and then as you get closer, it actually goes down, right? The interesting thing, as they know more and then get a little more precise about their estimates. On this one, just the opposite happened, which is when we started talking to them about this a couple days ago, it seemed like a big storm, but not that big a deal. The closer this one has gotten, the more precise their analysis has become, the harsher and more direct their language has become, especially about what this is going to mean around the coast. People need to take this very seriously. I mean, I remember watching, as many people probably do, a lot of the sort of handmade phone videos that people made of areas in Massachusetts along the coast that flooded during the January 4th storm. If you live in one of those areas, you should assume it's going to be at least that and probably more so with respect to this storm, and take seriously this notion. 5 inches of rain in less than 12 hours, combined with 2 major high tides, and the notion that a lot of that first high tide is not going to recede because the storm surge is coming in behind it. People should take this really seriously, irrespective of what it looks like out there today. You know, this is New England. Wait 15 minutes. The weather changes. The reason for this phone call at 1 o'clock that the Lieutenant Governor is leading with a bunch of folks in our administration and with the folks at the local level, which has a ton of the coastal communities involved in that conversation, is to fill them in on where the National Guard is going to stage their folks, what their plans are with respect to dealing with staging and sheltering and that type of thing. As Director Schwartz mentioned, the Red Cross will be involved in this, and we'll be doing a lot of the typical stuff we do in conjunction with our colleagues in local government. I think our goal here is to nudge people as hard as we can in the direction of making the right kinds of calls. I don't want to go to any sort of mandatory decision on this, but I want people to be fully informed about both the options and the risks and the decisions that we believe would be in the best interests of their communities.
Governor, in the January storm, you closed state offices and non-emergency accounts. Are you doing the same thing this time around?
No, we talked a little bit about that. I think our view on this one is because the stuff we're most worried about is really literally right along the coast and not across the Commonwealth, and because Boston, because of the presence of the harbor, is less likely to get the kind of combination of two high tides and a storm surge that we're going to see in some other places, it was our view that people should be able, if they use best judgment, to get to and from work safely. And remember, a lot of the people who will be commuting in and out of here anyway will be on either public transportation or roads that really don't run right along the coast.
What about those people who in the Seaport District or other close to shores? Are you advising anything about whether they should go to work tomorrow?
I mean, I would say two things about the Seaport District. The first is there's plenty of employers down there. By this point, they ought to have some sense about what the storm and the consequences thereof is likely to be like, and we would expect them to use best judgment to continue to pay attention to the reports, and if they think, based on what they see in those reports, they should change whatever decisions they've made, they should act accordingly. The one thing I would say is certain sections of the Seaport District are definitely going to be flooded. There are parts of the North End that are going to flood. Morrissey Boulevard is likely to flood. I mean, just think all the stuff that happened on January 4th, I think people can assume with a fairly high degree of confidence is going to happen again. The one piece that's working in the positive direction about that, this is something Secretary Pollock mentioned to me earlier, was that storm started as a snowstorm, all right? And because it snowed for a while before it rained, a lot of the drainage and the catch basins and the sewers were covered with snow by the time it started to rain, and that affected their ability to drain quickly on some of the roads and some of the sections in the city. Because this is all rain and because people have been working on clearing out the catch basins and dealing with some of that for the past day or two in anticipation of the storm, that will probably help. But that said, 15-foot tides that have the potential to hang around for as long as 12 or 15 hours, people should take that seriously.
Is this type of storm going to be sort of the new normal for the Seaport District, for example? Do you expect that part of the city of Boston will flood repeatedly each year, or are these just two storms that happen to come within a matter of months?
You know, I hesitate to draw too many conclusions from that because, you know, these big weather events have a tendency to have what I would describe as an individual nature to them. It's this plus that turns into it. But what I would say is that part of the reason why we created a climate change commission that was led by our public safety secretary and our environmental affairs secretary about a year ago to start thinking about the things we needed to do with respect to resiliency and adaptation, especially along the coast, had to deal with the fact that sea levels are rising. There's not much dispute about that. And storms, when they do occur, especially the ones along the water, because of the increase in the temperature and the rising sea levels, tend to pack a bit more of a punch.
Thank you. Can we have something off topic?
Sure.
Regarding the state police investigation of the super required TV writer.
Yep.
What's your position on some of the things that he allegedly has posted?
Well, I read some of the stuff that was posted, and I would say two things. The first is, you know, the fact that those posts and the vulgarity of them date back 5, 6, 7 years. This is not an isolated incident. This is an ongoing collection of thoughts and comments that have no place in law enforcement, no place in public discussion, no place in our community, period. That's point number one. Point number two, the state police has a code of conduct. It's a good code of conduct, and I would argue that the vast majority of the men and women who serve in the state police uphold and honor that contract and that code of conduct. If those posts were issued by someone who's a member of the state police, they are clearly a violation of the code of conduct, and he or she should be fired.
Thank you.
Okay.
Did you get a chance to look at the House harassment report?
I haven't, but I'm anxious to see it. We've been very aggressive about over-communicating the policies that we have in the executive branch, and I'm anxious to see the report and to see if there are ways we should be incorporating what's in that report into what we're already doing on our own.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Thanks, Joe. Good luck. People are going to be busy. Thanks, sir.